I never thought I'd be the kind of guy to post my life on Reddit, but here we are. I need to get this out because if I don't, I'm pretty sure I'm going to explode. My wife, well, soon to be ex-wife, but we'll get to that, and I have been married for 6 years. No kids, thankfully, because I'm sure that would have made this mess even worse. But for the longest time, I thought we were happy, you know? At least I was. Things started changing about 9 months ago. My wife, let's call her Emily, because that's not her real name but close enough, started using rideshares all the time. We live in the city, so it's not that unusual, but we've always had a car and public transport is great here. She said it was more convenient for her work schedule or because she didn't feel like dealing with parking. Fine. No big deal. But then, she started using the same driver, a lot. I only found out because she mentioned his name in passing a few times. Oh, I had Carlos again today. Or, Carlos is so reliable. I always feel safe with him. At first, it didn't even register with me because, it's just a driver, right? I figured she just liked how he drove or that they'd struck up small talk on her trips to and from work. But then, the rides got more frequent. And longer. I started noticing she'd get home much later than she used to, always with some excuse like, there was traffic. Or, Carlos was late, so I had to wait. Again, no red flags for me. Why would there be? I trusted her. But looking back now, I should have paid more attention. This was when things were starting to shift, and I was too blind to see it. This is just the beginning, though. You won't believe where this goes next. Fast forward a few months, and I'm starting to feel a change in the air. Emily's been acting weird, more irritable, distracted. When I tried to talk to her, she brushed it off with that classic line. I'm just stressed from work. I wanted to help her, but every time I reached out, she'd snap back with some snarky comment, leaving me feeling like I was walking on eggshells. One Friday night, I planned a little surprise dinner for us, hoping to reignite the spark. I bought her favorite wine and cooked a meal that I knew would make her smile. But when she got home, she was late, again. She stumbled in around 9 p.m., reeking of cheap perfume, and I could see the tension in her shoulders. Where were you? I asked, trying to keep my tone light. Just hanging out with friends, she replied, tossing her purse on the counter. I felt a twist in my gut, but I let it slide, convincing myself it was nothing. After all, who doesn't need a night out with friends? But the nagging feeling wouldn't leave me. I decided to follow her on one of her rideshare nights, just to see what was really going on. I thought maybe I was being paranoid, but I had to know. So, I waited until she left for another girls' night out, and hopped into my car, following her. I felt a mix of dread and determination as I tracked her route. She directed the driver to a part of town I didn't recognize. My heart raced as we pulled into a parking lot of a dimly lit bar. I parked a bit away, trying to play it cool while my mind raced with possibilities. After a while, she stepped out, and my blood ran cold. Carlos, her rideshare driver, was waiting outside the bar. They greeted each other like old friends, hugs, laughter, the kind of warmth that stung. I watched in disbelief as they entered the bar together. I was frozen in place, unable to wrap my head around what I was seeing. I told myself to stay calm. Maybe they were just friends. But deep down, I felt the weight of betrayal creeping in. Little did I know, this was just the start of my unraveling. The truth would hit harder than I ever imagined. I sat in my car for what felt like hours, wrestling with my emotions. I wanted to storm in there and confront them, but I also didn't want to make a scene. I kept replaying the last few months in my head, her late nights, the way she'd laugh at her phone, how distant she'd become. All the signs I had ignored were crashing down on me. Finally, I gathered enough courage to go inside the bar. The ambient noise of laughter and music washed over me as I scanned the room, my heart pounding in my chest. Then, I spotted them in a corner booth, Emily and Carlos, sharing a plate of nachos, their faces illuminated by the dim lights. They were leaning into each other, sharing secrets and laughter like they were the only two people in the world. I couldn't believe my eyes. The anger bubbled up inside me, hot and consuming. I took a deep breath and walked over, my feet moving almost of their own accord. "Emily!" I called out, my voice steady despite the chaos in my head. She looked up, her face morphing from surprise to horror in an instant. "What are you doing here?" she exclaimed, her tone sharp, like I'd interrupted something sacred. "What am I doing here? I should ask you the same thing." I shot back, glancing at Carlos, who was awkwardly trying to fade into the background. "This is none of your business," she hissed, her eyes narrowing. I could feel the tension crackling between us. "None of my business? You're here with him, Emily. This is exactly my business." Carlos shifted uncomfortably, looking between us. I could see he didn't want to be part of this confrontation, but it was too late. I had to know the truth. "So, what's going on? Just a little friendly dinner? Because it looks a lot like a date to me." I glared at Emily, who suddenly turned defensive. "You're being ridiculous. Carlos is just a friend. You're overreacting." Her voice was sharp, but I could hear the tremor beneath her facade. "A friend? Really? How many friends do you have that you've been seeing behind my back?" At this point, people were starting to notice us. The weight of the moment crashed down on her, and I saw the facade begin to crack. "You don't understand. You never listen to me," she shouted, her voice rising, drawing even more attention. "This is why I need someone who actually gets me." I stood there, stunned, trying to process her words. She was saying this in public, like it was a normal thing to admit. I felt a mix of rage and heartbreak as the reality of her betrayal hit me like a punch. "So this is it then? You're just going to throw everything away for a taxi driver? He's more than that!" she yelled, her eyes flashing with defiance. "You've been so consumed with work, you don't even see me anymore. You don't care." I was about to respond, but I knew it was pointless. The damage was done, and I was done pretending everything was fine. This was just the beginning of a storm I never saw coming. I stormed out of the bar, my heart racing and my mind swirling with confusion and anger. Emily's words echoed in my head. "You don't care!" It felt like a slap in the face. All those late nights spent working, thinking I was doing it for us, and here she was, throwing it all away for someone else. I got into my car, fists clenched around the steering wheel, and drove home without thinking. The city lights blurred past me, a stark contrast to the darkness that was settling in my heart. How could she do this? When I got home, the emptiness of the apartment hit me like a wave. Every corner reminded me of happier times, moments we'd shared. I poured myself a drink, hoping it would dull the pain, but it only intensified the feeling of betrayal. A few hours later, I heard the front door click open. Emily walked in, looking like a deer caught in headlights. I could see she was trying to play it cool, but her facade was slipping. "Can we talk?" she asked tentatively, her voice softer, almost pleading. "Talk? About what? How you were just cozying up to Carlos in front of God and everyone?" I shot back, anger bubbling to the surface again. "I told you, it's not what you think," she protested, crossing her arms defensively. "Not what I think? You think I'm going to believe that? You were practically wrapped around him." I couldn't contain my disbelief. "I was just trying to find some happiness, okay? You've been so distant," she cried, her eyes filling with tears. "So, you thought cheating was the answer?" I spat, the bitterness coating my words. "You could have just talked to me. But you chose to run to another man." She took a step back, the weight of her actions finally catching up to her. I didn't mean for it to happen this way," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I was lonely. You weren't there. You don't get to turn this around on me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You made a choice, Emily. A choice to betray me." The tears flowed freely now, and she fell onto the couch, sobbing. I felt a mix of anger and pity, but it was overshadowed by the realization that this was not the woman I married. "I can't keep doing this. I need space," I finally said, my heart heavy. I couldn't believe I was saying it, but I needed time to think, to process. Emily looked up, desperation in her eyes. Please don't do this. I can fix it. I'll end things with Carlos, I swear. It's too late for that, I replied, my voice colder than I intended. I need to think about my next steps. She opened her mouth to argue, but then closed it, the reality of the situation washing over her. The silence between us felt like a chasm that couldn't be crossed. As I turned to walk away, I knew that this was just the beginning of a long and painful journey ahead. I had no idea how I was going to navigate the fallout of her betrayal, but one thing was clear: things would never be the same again. The days dragged on after that confrontation, each one heavier than the last. Emily stayed in the apartment, but the tension was suffocating. We moved around each other like strangers, avoiding eye contact, conversations reduced to the bare essentials: what to eat, who would take out the trash. The spark that once lit our lives had flickered out, leaving only ashes in its wake. I spent my evenings in a haze, trying to piece together my shattered reality. I reached out to friends, looking for support, but I didn't even know how to explain the situation without feeling utterly humiliated. The shame of being betrayed by someone I thought I knew so well weighed heavily on me. One night, I decided to hit up a bar alone, needing to clear my head. As I sat nursing a drink, I overheard a couple nearby, laughing and sharing stories. Their chemistry was palpable, a reminder of what I once had with Emily. I felt a pang in my chest, a longing for the good times we'd shared. But then the memory of her betrayal hit me like a cold slap. I took a deep breath, reminding myself why I was there. I was determined not to let her actions define me. It was time to think about my future, my happiness, my peace. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. That night, I made the hardest decision of my life. I would file for divorce. I didn't want to remain trapped in a toxic cycle of mistrust and anger. I needed to reclaim my life and my happiness, even if it felt daunting. The next day, I contacted a lawyer. As I sat in their office, listening to legal jargon, I felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. It was a step toward closure, but it also marked the end of a chapter one never expected to close. I couldn't shake the feeling of finality. When I returned home, Emily was sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the TV. I knew I couldn't put it off any longer. Emily, I began, my voice steady but quiet. She turned to me, her expression a mix of hope and fear. What is it? I'm filing for divorce, I said, watching as her face fell, the color draining from her cheeks. No. Please, she pleaded, tears welling up again. We can fix this. I'll do anything. You had your chance, I replied, my voice firmer than I felt inside. You chose to betray me, and I can't live like this anymore. I made a mistake. I was lonely, and Carlos is not the answer, I interrupted, feeling the weight of my anger rise again. You need to take responsibility for your actions. She fell silent, the fight leaving her. It was as if the realization hit her that this was really happening. I never wanted it to end like this, she whispered, her voice trembling. Neither did I said, my heart heavy. But this is what you've chosen. As I turned to leave, I felt a strange mix of sadness and liberation. The road ahead would be difficult, but I knew it was the only way to find my way back to myself. I was finally ready to take that first step toward healing, no matter how painful it might be. Filing for divorce was just the first step, and I quickly learned that the aftermath was a messy labyrinth of emotions and logistics. The next few weeks felt like an endless cycle of meetings with my lawyer, sorting out finances, and making decisions I never thought I'd have to make. Each conversation seemed to peel back another layer of my relationship with Emily, revealing scars I hadn't fully acknowledged until now. As the divorce process dragged on, I felt an array of emotions: anger, sadness, relief, all intertwining and making it difficult to breathe. I started distancing myself from friends and family, unsure of how to explain the whole ordeal without sounding like a failure. I threw myself into work, hoping to drown out the noise of my thoughts, but the ache remained, a constant reminder of what I'd lost. Emily moved into a friend's place shortly after I filed, but it didn't take long for her to start reaching out. Texts turned into calls, and soon, she was pleading for a chance to talk face to face. I was torn. Part of me wanted to hear her out, to understand her side, but another part of me knew that talking would only drag out the pain. Finally, I agreed to meet. We chose a small cafe halfway between our new homes. As I sat there waiting, I felt a knot tightening in my stomach. I hadn't seen her in weeks, and though I was resolved to stand my ground, part of me wondered if she tried to pull me back in with her charm. When she walked in, I barely recognized her. The sparkle in her eyes was replaced by a dullness that matched her sallow complexion. She looked tired, worn down by the emotional fallout. As she sat down, I noticed the way she fidgeted with her hands, a stark contrast to the confident woman I'd once known. "Thanks for meeting me," she began, her voice small. I nodded, trying to keep my expression neutral. "What did you want to talk about?" She took a deep breath, and I could see the tears brimming in her eyes. "I know I messed up, and I'm sorry. I never meant to hurt you." "That's the problem, Emily," I said, my voice firm. "You didn't just hurt me. You shattered my trust." "I know," she replied, her voice cracking. "But I want to make it right. I've been seeing a therapist, trying to understand why I made those choices." "And what about Carlos?" I pressed, feeling the anger bubble back up. "You think that makes it okay? Running to another man? It was a mistake. A stupid, reckless mistake," she pleaded. "I thought I could find happiness, but I see now that it was just a distraction. I was lost." I sat back, digesting her words. Maybe she was genuinely remorseful, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was too little, too late. "Emily, this isn't something you can fix with a few therapy sessions and a heartfelt apology. You made your choice." The silence that followed felt heavy. I could see the reality settling in for her. "So, this is really it then?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can't go back to what we had. I need to move on." The tears spilled over, and she buried her face in her hands. I felt a pang of sadness for the woman I once loved, but I also felt a weight lift off my shoulders. This was the closure I needed, even if it was painful. As we parted ways that day, I knew I was finally taking control of my life. The road ahead would still be rocky, but I was ready to embrace whatever came next. No more living in the shadows of someone else's choices. It was time for me to find my own path, one step at a time. After that meeting, I felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness. Emily's tears lingered in my mind, but I knew I couldn't let them pull me back in. The divorce process continued, but I was determined to focus on myself. I wanted to rebuild the parts of me that had been lost in the chaos of our relationship. I started hitting the gym regularly, channeling my frustration and sadness into working out. At first, it was tough. I struggled to push through the workouts, feeling out of shape and emotionally drained. But slowly, the physical activity began to lift my spirits. I started to feel stronger, both physically and mentally. As I gained more confidence in the gym, I also decided to dive back into hobbies I had neglected during my marriage. I dusted off my guitar, which had been gathering dust in the corner of my room, and began playing again. Music had always been a refuge for me, a way to express emotions I struggled to articulate. One night, as I strummed my favorite song, I felt a sense of liberation wash over me. It was a reminder of who I used to be before Emily's betrayal, a connection to a part of me I thought was lost. I started writing my own music again, pouring my feelings into lyrics that captured the heartbreak and anger, but also the hope of moving forward. I also began to reconnect with friends I had drifted away from during my marriage. I reached out to old buddies for drinks and laughter, sharing stories and enjoying the camaraderie that I had missed. It was refreshing to be around people who didn't know the painful history of my recent life. It allowed me to be just me again. Yet, even with all this progress, I still had moments of vulnerability. There were nights when I would lie awake, memories of Emily flooding my mind. I remembered the good times, the laughter, the adventures, and it hurt. But I also reminded myself of why I was moving on. I was reclaiming my life, step by step. One evening, while I was out with friends, I met someone new. Her name was Sarah, and she was everything I needed at that moment: kind, funny, and unburdened by my past. We hit it off immediately, and as we talked and laughed, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe love wasn't out of reach after all. We exchanged numbers, and I found myself excited at the prospect of getting to know her. For the first time in months, I felt a hint of joy creeping back into my life. The future was still uncertain, but I was finally starting to see a light at the end of the tunnel. As the divorce loomed closer, I knew I had to embrace this new chapter wholeheartedly. I was no longer defined by my past mistakes or Emily's choices. I was learning to stand on my own 2 feet, and I was ready to see where this journey would take me next. As weeks turned into months, the divorce process moved forward, and I started seeing Sarah more often. Our connection felt natural and easy, a stark contrast to the tension I had felt with Emily for so long. We explored the city together, shared meals at cozy restaurants, and even took long walks in the park, talking about everything and nothing at all. Sarah had a way of making me laugh, of drawing me out of my shell. She was supportive without being overbearing, always encouraging me to talk about my feelings but never pushing too hard. I found myself sharing bits and pieces of my past, but I was careful. I didn't want to unload all my baggage at once. One afternoon, as we walked along a sun-drenched path lined with blooming flowers, she took my hand, and I felt a warmth spread through me. I hadn't felt this kind of comfort in a long time. "I'm really glad we met," she said, her eyes sparkling. "Me too," I replied, feeling genuine gratitude wash over me. I realized how important it was to surround myself with people who lifted me up rather than dragged me down. As the divorce finalization date approached, I had a mix of anxiety and relief. I knew this was the right decision, but there was a part of me that felt apprehensive about closing that chapter completely. Would I ever truly heal? Would I be able to trust again? The day finally came, and I sat in the lawyer's office, ready to sign the papers. Emily was supposed to be there as well, and I wasn't sure how I would feel seeing her one last time. When she arrived, I noticed she looked different, still sad, but perhaps a bit more composed. We exchanged pleasantries, but the air was thick with unspoken words. When the lawyer presented the documents, I could feel my heart racing. Signing my name felt like severing a bond that had once meant everything to me, but also like freeing myself from chains I hadn't realized were there. As I signed, I felt a rush of emotions: sadness for what was lost, anger for the betrayal, but above all, a sense of liberation. This was my chance to start over. When the final papers were handed over, I looked at Emily one last time. "I hope you find what you're looking for," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. Her eyes shimmered with tears, but she nodded, accepting the finality of it all. "I'm sorry for everything." "Me too," I replied, turning away and walking out of the office. The weight of the world seemed to lift as I stepped outside, the sun shining brighter than I remembered. I took a deep breath, feeling a sense of clarity. I was free. That evening, Sarah and I went out to celebrate my newfound freedom. We laughed, shared stories, and danced under the stars. It felt surreal to be moving forward, to feel joy again. I could see a future blossoming, one that didn't carry the shadows of my past. In that moment, I realized that healing was a journey, and while the scars of my marriage would always be there, they wouldn't define me. I was ready to embrace whatever came next, and for the first time in a long time, I felt genuinely hopeful. With the divorce finalized, life began to shift in ways I hadn't expected. I was still processing the emotional fallout, but each day felt like a step toward reclaiming my identity. I threw myself into work, taking on new projects and challenges that reignited my passion. It felt good to be productive and to focus on something other than the heartache. Sarah became an integral part of my life. We spent weekends exploring new restaurants, attending live music events, and enjoying lazy Sunday mornings filled with coffee and conversation. With her, I felt a sense of ease I hadn't experienced in years. She encouraged me to share my music, and I began performing at local open mic nights, reconnecting with my artistic side. But even with all this progress, I had moments when the past crept back in. One night, as I played a song I had written about my journey, I saw a couple in the audience whispering and laughing together. A pang of jealousy hit me, and I couldn't help but remember the warmth Emily and I once shared. I shook it off, reminding myself that it was normal to have mixed emotions, but I resolved to be more present with Sarah. One evening, we were sitting on my couch, watching a movie. I caught myself smiling at her, feeling grateful for her presence. Suddenly, she turned to me, her expression serious. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure, anything," I replied, curious. "Do you think you're ready for something more serious? I know your divorce was recent, and I don't want to rush you." Her question caught me off guard. I hadn't really thought about how to navigate a serious relationship again so soon. I paused, searching for the right words. "I really like you, Sarah. You make me happy. But I guess I'm still figuring things out." "That's okay," she said gently. "I just want to make sure we're on the same page." I appreciated her honesty. It was refreshing to be in a relationship where communication was open and straightforward. "I want to take things slow. I don't want to bring my past into this," I admitted. "I completely understand," she replied, her smile returning. "Let's just enjoy where we are right now." With that weight off my shoulders, I felt more relaxed. We spent the rest of the night laughing and joking, and I realized how much I valued this connection. As the months passed, I continued to work on myself. I signed up for a music class and even started a small songwriting group. The creative energy was invigorating, and I found solace in sharing my stories with others who understood the healing power of music. Despite the progress, I still had occasional encounters with Emily. We would run into each other at mutual friends' gatherings, and each time was a reminder of our shared past. Those moments were awkward and laced with unspoken tension, but I tried to be cordial. One evening, I found myself cornered at a party, forced to interact with her. "How have you been?" she asked, a hint of nervousness in her voice. "I'm doing well. Just focusing on music and work," I replied, keeping it light. She nodded, a look of regret washing over her face. "I'm glad to hear that. I've been doing a lot of reflecting myself." I wanted to ask what that meant, but instead, I just smiled politely and changed the subject. I didn't need to dwell on her reflections. I had my own life to focus on. As I navigated this new normal, I felt a mix of emotions but also a growing sense of stability. I was carving out my own identity, one free from the shadows of my past, and it felt empowering. Sarah was a bright spot in my life, and I looked forward to seeing where our journey would take us. Just when I felt like I was finally settling into my new life, life threw me a curveball. It was a sunny Saturday afternoon, and Sarah and I had planned a day trip to a nearby beach. I was excited, nothing like sun, sand, and good company to recharge my spirits. We packed a cooler with snacks and hit the road, the music blaring and laughter filling the car. As we arrived and found a spot on the sand, I felt a sense of freedom wash over me. It was everything I needed. As we set up our towels, I noticed a group of people a few yards away. My heart sank as I recognized Emily among them. She looked carefree, laughing with friends, her hair blowing in the ocean breeze. I felt a mix of surprise and discomfort. I didn't want my past to intrude on this moment with Sarah. "Everything okay?" Sarah asked, sensing my change in demeanor. "Yeah, I didn't expect to see someone I know here," I said, trying to keep my tone casual. Sarah looked over and then back at me, concern etched on her face. "Do you want to say hi?" "No, it's fine. I'd rather not," I replied, forcing a smile. I didn't want to bring any drama into our day. We spent the next few hours swimming, playing beach games, and soaking up the sun. It felt good to be distracted, but I couldn't shake the unease of knowing Emily was close by. As we lay on our towels, chatting and joking, I caught a glimpse of her again. This time, she was looking over at us, her expression unreadable. I tried to focus on Sarah, who was animatedly talking about a recent concert she attended. But the tension in my chest wouldn't fade. Just as we were packing up to leave, Sarah suggested grabbing some ice cream from a nearby stand. Sounds perfect, I agreed, grateful for the distraction. As we walked toward the stand, I spotted Emily walking toward us, her friends trailing behind. My heart raced, and I felt a rush of emotions, fear, anger, and a strange sense of nostalgia. I wanted to turn and run, but it was too late. Hey, can we talk? Emily said as she approached, her tone surprisingly calm. Sure, I replied, glancing at Sarah, who looked uncertain but gave me an encouraging nod. I didn't know you were here, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I was just spending some time with friends. I didn't mean to interrupt your day, she said, her eyes darting between us. You're not interrupting, I said, my tone more clipped than I intended. I just wanted to say, I've been thinking about us, she began, her voice softening. I'm really sorry for everything. I've realized a lot about myself and what I've lost. I felt a wave of irritation wash over me. Emily, I appreciate that, but we're done. I'm moving forward with my life. Her expression shifted, a mix of desperation and sadness. I know. I wish I could go back and change things. You can't, I said firmly. What's done is done. Sarah, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke up. We're happy now. It's important to respect that. Emily looked at Sarah, and for a moment, the tension was palpable. I could see Emily processing the reality of the situation, and I felt a surge of protectiveness for the life I was building. I didn't mean to intrude, Emily said, her voice wavering. I just wanted to express my regret. I get it, but I need to focus on my future, and that doesn't include you, I replied, trying to keep my tone compassionate yet firm. She nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I understand. I just hope you find happiness. As she walked away, I felt a mixture of relief and sadness. I didn't want to hurt her, but I couldn't let her pull me back into the past. You handled that well, Sarah said, squeezing my hand as we resumed our walk toward the ice cream stand. Thanks. It's just complicated, I admitted. Life is complicated, she said with a soft smile. But I'm glad we're figuring it out together. With that, the tension began to dissipate, and I realized that while the past would always linger, it didn't have to define my future. I had Sarah by my side, and I was ready to embrace whatever came next. The unexpected encounter with Emily at the beach lingered in my mind for days. It felt like a weight I couldn't shake off, and I found myself replaying the conversation over and over. I had been resolute, but a part of me wondered if I had been too harsh. As I returned to my routine, I threw myself back into work and my music. I had a few gigs lined up, and performing became a welcome distraction. The thrill of being on stage, sharing my stories through song, allowed me to channel my emotions into something productive. One evening, I was set to perform at a local cafe, a place known for its open mic nights. The crowd was lively, and as I waited for my turn, I felt a mixture of excitement and nerves. I had written a new song that reflected my journey through heartbreak and healing, and I was eager to share it. When my name was called, I stepped onto the small stage, the spotlight warming my skin. I scanned the audience, spotting familiar faces, including Sarah's. She beamed at me, her presence grounding me. I took a deep breath, picking up my guitar, and began to play. As the notes flowed, I poured my heart into the lyrics. I sang about loss, regret, and the journey to reclaiming myself. The music wrapped around me like a comforting blanket, and I could see people in the audience swaying along, feeling the emotions I was laying bare. When I finished, the applause was thunderous. I smiled, feeling a rush of validation. As I stepped down from the stage, Sarah rushed over, her eyes shining. That was amazing! You have such a gift, she said, wrapping her arms around me in a tight hug. Thanks. I was a bit nervous, I admitted, feeling a blush creep onto my cheeks. You couldn't tell at all. Your voice really moved me, she replied, her enthusiasm infectious. As we chatted about the performance, I felt lighter. Music had always been a powerful outlet for me, and I realized how essential it was to my healing process. But just as I was starting to feel like I was moving forward, life threw another unexpected curveball. A few days later, I received a message from a mutual friend, inviting me to a gathering. The catch? Emily would be there. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to avoid the potential awkwardness, but another part felt curious. Maybe it was time to confront the situation head-on. After discussing it with Sarah, who encouraged me to go, I decided to attend. That evening, as I walked into the familiar space filled with laughter and chatter, I felt a rush of anxiety. I scanned the room and soon spotted Emily, laughing with friends, her hair cascading around her shoulders. She looked beautiful, but the sight of her stirred a mix of emotions within me. I took a deep breath and approached the group, trying to keep my demeanor relaxed. As I greeted our mutual friends, I could feel Emily's gaze on me. When our eyes met, there was a brief moment of tension. "Hey," she said softly, stepping closer. "Hi," I replied, unsure of how to navigate this. "I saw you perform the other night. You were incredible," she said, sincerity in her voice. "Thanks," I replied, a bit taken aback. "It felt good to get back on stage." "I'm glad. You really have a way with words," she said, her eyes searching mine. I could feel the atmosphere shift, and for a moment, it was as if the world around us faded. But I knew I had to maintain my boundaries. "I'm glad you enjoyed it. I'm focused on moving forward now." Her expression shifted slightly, a flicker of pain in her eyes, but she nodded. "I get that. I'm trying to do the same." The conversation felt heavy, laden with unspoken regrets. We stood there, surrounded by friends, but the air between us was charged with memories. "I hope you find happiness, Emily," I said finally, my voice steady. "You too," she replied, a hint of sadness lingering in her tone. As I walked away, I felt a strange sense of closure. I didn't know what the future held, but I realized that I could face it with a newfound strength. I had come so far, and while the past would always be a part of me, it no longer defined who I was. Later that night, as I talked with Sarah about the gathering, I felt grateful for her support. "You did great handling that," she said, wrapping her arms around me. "Thanks. It felt like a big step," I replied, leaning into her embrace. I knew I was still on a journey of healing, but I was ready to embrace whatever came next, one song at a time. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself settling into a routine that felt increasingly fulfilling. My music was thriving, and I had more gigs lined up, each performance bolstering my confidence and helping me process my emotions. The more I played, the more I felt like I was reclaiming my voice, both literally and metaphorically. Sarah and I grew closer, exploring not just the city but also our dreams and aspirations. We talked late into the night, sharing our hopes for the future and our fears about relationships. One evening, as we walked through a park, Sarah stopped and turned to me, her expression thoughtful. "What do you think love is?" she asked, her gaze piercing through the twilight. The question took me by surprise. I paused, reflecting on everything I had experienced over the past year. "I think it's about trust and support. It's knowing someone sees you for who you really are and accepts you, flaws and all." "That's beautiful," she replied, smiling softly. "Do you think we can have that?" I felt a flutter of anxiety. We had been enjoying each other's company without the pressure of labels, but the question hung in the air. "I hope so. I'm just still learning to trust again." "That's okay. We can take our time," she assured me, and I felt a wave of relief. As I continued to navigate my feelings for Sarah, I also found myself reflecting on Emily. Despite everything that had happened, I realized I had some unresolved feelings lingering. While I had moved on in many ways, I knew I hadn't fully processed the end of that chapter. One night, while rehearsing for an upcoming gig, I started writing a new song. The lyrics poured out of me, raw, honest, and filled with the pain of my past. I found myself singing about betrayal, loss, but also about the power of moving forward. As the last chord rang out, I felt a cathartic release. The next week, I performed the new song at an open mic. As I sang, I saw Sarah in the audience, her expression filled with encouragement. The lyrics resonated deeply, and afterward, I received a flurry of compliments. But one comment stood out. An old friend approached me, eyes wide. "Wow, that was really powerful. It sounded personal." I nodded, feeling a bit exposed. "It was. It's about my journey. You've come a long way," she said, placing a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "It's inspiring." That comment stayed with me. It was a reminder of how far I had come, and how important it was to honor my journey. I started to see healing not just as moving away from the past but as integrating those experiences into who I was becoming. Meanwhile, Sarah and I continued to explore our connection. One weekend, we decided to take a spontaneous trip to the mountains. As we drove, the scenery shifted from urban sprawl to breathtaking views, and I felt a sense of exhilaration wash over me. We spent the weekend hiking, laughing, and talking about everything from our childhoods to our dreams for the future. One evening, as we sat by a campfire, the stars twinkling above us, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. "You know," Sarah said, breaking the comfortable silence, "I really appreciate how open you've been with me. It's not always easy to share." "I feel safe with you," I replied honestly. "It's refreshing." She smiled, and in that moment I realized how much I valued this connection. It was a stark contrast to my relationship with Emily, where communication often felt strained and insincere. As the fire crackled, I turned serious. "I want to be honest about my past, but I also want to focus on us." "You deserve that." "I appreciate that," Sarah said, her gaze steady. "I want us to build something real together." Those words hung in the air like a promise. I felt a swell of hope for the future, a future that didn't need to be defined by my past mistakes but rather by the choices I was making now. The trip ended too soon, but it had solidified my feelings for Sarah. I realized I was ready to embrace this new chapter, not just with open arms but with an open heart. I had come so far, and as I looked ahead, I could finally see a path illuminated by the lessons I had learned along the way. It was time to forge ahead, not just in my music, but in my life. The journey wasn't over, but I was ready to walk it hand in hand with someone who truly saw me. As summer rolled into fall, life seemed to take on a new rhythm. My relationship with Sarah deepened, and I felt a warmth I hadn't experienced in years. We shared intimate moments and laughter, exploring not just the world around us but also the intricacies of each other's minds and hearts. But as our bond grew stronger, so did the nagging sense that I hadn't fully shared my past with her. Emily's betrayal was still a fresh wound, and while I felt ready to move on, I knew I needed to be honest about what I had gone through. One evening, as we relaxed in my living room, I decided it was time to open up. We were nestled on the couch, a bowl of popcorn between us, watching a movie I barely paid attention to. I turned to Sarah, who looked content, her hair cascading over her shoulders in the warm light. "Hey, can we talk for a minute?" I asked, my heart racing. "Of course," she replied, sensing my shift in tone. "I want to share something important about my past. It's been weighing on me, and I think it's time you know." I began, feeling vulnerable. She nodded, her expression attentive. "I'm here for you. You know about my divorce and how it was a painful experience," I continued. "But I haven't really talked about the specifics. I think it's important for you to understand where I'm coming from." As I recounted the details of my relationship with Emily, how it had started with love but had devolved into betrayal, I felt a mix of emotions rising. I shared how the affair had shattered my trust and how long it took me to rebuild my sense of self. It was hard to accept that someone I loved could hurt me that way, I confessed, my voice thick with emotion. It took me a long time to believe I could find happiness again. Sarah listened intently, her eyes reflecting empathy and understanding. When I finished, she took a deep breath, processing everything. "Thank you for sharing that with me," she said softly. "It must have been difficult." It was. I wanted you to know because I care about you, and I don't want any secrets between us. I replied, relieved to have opened up but still anxious about her reaction. I appreciate your honesty, she said, her voice steady. I can't imagine how painful that must have been, but I'm glad you're moving forward. I want to keep moving forward with you, I said, my heart racing. She smiled, and I felt a surge of hope. Let's keep building our own story then. In that moment, the weight I had carried for so long felt a little lighter. I realized that while my past shaped me, it didn't have to define my future. But just as I started to feel more secure, another wave of anxiety hit me. I hadn't mentioned something crucial, the fact that Emily was still in my life in some capacity. We had mutual friends, and I didn't want to create unnecessary tension by avoiding her completely. A few days later, while out with some friends at a bar, Emily walked in. My heart raced, and I glanced at Sarah, who was chatting with another friend. I took a deep breath, preparing myself for whatever might happen. Emily approached, her smile bright but tinged with something unspoken. Hey, I didn't expect to see you here, she said, her eyes darting between us. Hey, I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral. I'm glad you're doing well, she said, her voice steady. I've been working on myself too. I could see the effort she was putting into appearing composed. That's good to hear, I said, hoping to keep the conversation light. But then, Sarah joined us, a smile on her face. Oh, hi. I'm Sarah, she said, extending her hand. Emily's expression shifted, surprise crossing her face. I didn't realize you two were together, she said, a hint of tension in her voice. Yeah, we are, Sarah replied, her tone confident. I watched the exchange closely, tension crackling in the air. We've been having a great time getting to know each other, I added, trying to reinforce our bond. Emily nodded, her smile faltering slightly. That's nice. I hope you both are happy. The conversation felt strained, and I could sense the underlying discomfort. Sarah, ever perceptive, sensed it too. She turned to me, a question in her eyes. Let's grab a drink, she suggested, her voice bright, trying to lighten the mood. As we walked away, I felt a mix of relief and unease. I didn't want to keep running into Emily, but I also didn't want to avoid her completely. It was a delicate balance, and I could sense Sarah's discomfort. Later that night, as we left the bar, I turned to Sarah. I'm sorry about that. I didn't mean for it to feel awkward. It's okay, she replied, her voice soft. I just wish it didn't have to be this complicated. Me too, I admitted, feeling a pang of guilt. As we drove home, I realized that while I was ready to move on, the shadows of my past still lingered, and navigating this new relationship would require transparency and patience. I knew I had to keep the lines of communication open, not just about my past but also about how it impacted my present. The journey was far from over, but I was determined to face it head-on, step by step, with Sarah by my side. As the weeks passed, I found myself in a precarious balancing act between my past and present. My relationship with Sarah deepened, but the specter of Emily loomed large. Despite my best efforts to keep things light and straightforward, the tension from our brief encounter at the bar still lingered in the back of my mind. One crisp autumn evening, I received a text from Emily, asking if we could talk. My heart raced as I read the message, an unsettling mix of anxiety and curiosity swirling within me. I hadn't expected to hear from her again so soon, and I knew I needed to tread carefully. I'll be right back, I said to Sarah as we were relaxing at my apartment. Where are you going? She asked, concern flashing in her eyes. Just to meet a friend, I replied, not wanting to delve into details just yet. I didn't want to stir up any unnecessary worries. I drove to the cafe where we agreed to meet, my thoughts racing. What could Emily possibly want to discuss? As I arrived, I spotted her sitting at a corner table, nervously tapping her fingers on the surface. Hey, I said, sliding into the seat across from her. Thanks for meeting me, she said, her voice shaky. Of course. What's on your mind? I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. She took a deep breath, visibly gathering her thoughts. I know things ended badly between us, and I've had a lot of time to reflect. I realize I hurt you deeply, and I'm truly sorry. I appreciate that, I replied, but I felt my walls going up. But I've moved on. I'm in a new relationship now. I know, she said quickly, her eyes pleading. I don't want to disrupt that. I needed to tell you that I've been seeing a therapist and working on myself. I'm not the same person I was. Her words struck me. It was something I had hoped for her, but part of me felt skeptical. That's great, but it doesn't change what happened. I know it doesn't. I just want you to know that I'm genuinely trying to be a better person, she said, her voice thick with emotion. And I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me one day. I looked into her eyes and saw the sincerity there, but I wasn't ready to open that door. Forgiveness is a journey for me. I'm still processing everything. I understand, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. I just needed to tell you this. I don't want to be a ghost from your past. I want you to be happy. We talked for a while longer, the conversation shifting to lighter topics. As we parted ways, I felt a strange sense of closure. Maybe this was the step I needed to fully release the hold my past had on me. When I returned home, Sarah was waiting for me, her expression a mixture of concern and curiosity. How did it go? She asked, her tone tentative. It was different. She's trying to change, I think, I replied, not wanting to get too deep just yet. And how do you feel about that? Sarah probed, her eyes searching mine. Honestly? It felt good to talk to her. I think I'm finally letting go of the resentment, I said, realizing as I spoke how true it felt. Sarah nodded, relief washing over her face. That's important. I just want you to be happy. I am happy especially with you, I said, leaning in to kiss her gently. As we settled in for the evening, I felt a renewed sense of clarity. I was finally starting to understand that my journey wasn't about erasing my past but about integrating those experiences into the person I was becoming. A few days later, I was preparing for another gig, this time at a larger venue. As I practiced, I noticed that the songs I had been writing were becoming more introspective, reflecting my growth and the lessons I'd learned. The night of the performance arrived, and I stepped onto the stage, the energy in the room electrifying. I looked out at the audience and spotted Sarah beaming at me, her encouragement a soothing balm. I took a deep breath and started to play. This time, my set included the song I had written about my journey through betrayal and healing. As I sang, I could feel the emotions pouring out of me, every note resonating with the struggles I had faced, the lessons I had learned, and the hope I had for the future. When I finished, the applause was thunderous, and I felt a sense of fulfillment wash over me. As I stepped off the stage, Sarah rushed to me, her eyes sparkling. You were incredible! That last song was so powerful, she said, wrapping her arms around me. Thank you. It felt amazing to perform, I replied, feeling lighter than I had in a long time. As the night continued, I found myself surrounded by friends, laughter, and music. I felt a sense of belonging and acceptance that I had longed for. I was no longer the man defined by his past. I was someone who had risen from the ashes, ready to embrace life with open arms. That night, I realized I had finally taken the next step in my journey. I was ready to move forward, leaving behind the shadows of betrayal, and welcoming the light of new beginnings. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I felt equipped to face it, hand in hand with Sarah. As fall gave way to winter, I found myself in a season of reflection and gratitude. My relationship with Sarah blossomed, and I felt a renewed sense of hope. The shadows of my past, while still present, no longer cast a dark pall over my life. Instead, they served as reminders of how far I had come. The day after my performance, Sarah and I decided to take a weekend trip to a cabin in the woods. We needed a break from the hustle and bustle of city life, and the idea of cozying up by a fire, surrounded by nature, felt perfect. As we drove along the winding roads, the trees transformed into a canvas of vibrant oranges and deep reds, the beauty of autumn wrapping around us like a warm embrace. Once we arrived, we settled in and lit a fire in the fireplace. As the flames danced, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. We cooked dinner together, laughing and playfully arguing over who chopped the vegetables better. It felt so normal, so right, and I was grateful for this moment of simplicity. After dinner, we settled on the couch with mugs of hot cocoa, the warmth of the fire casting flickering shadows around the room. "This is perfect," Sarah said, her eyes sparkling. "It really is," I replied, leaning back against the couch. "I feel so lucky to be here with you." "Me too," she said, a shy smile crossing her lips. As we talked, I felt the urge to share more about my journey. "You know, I've been thinking about everything that's happened in the past year. I didn't just lose my marriage, I lost a part of myself," I began, my voice steady. "But you found it again," she interjected, her eyes encouraging. "I did," I said, feeling a swell of emotion. "And it's because of moments like this. You've helped me reclaim my passion for life and music." Sarah smiled, her expression warm. "I want you to know that you can always talk to me. I'm here for you, no matter what." "I appreciate that more than you know," I replied, my heart swelling. As the night wore on, we shared stories and dreams, laying bare our hopes for the future. It felt liberating to open up, to envision a life built on trust and understanding. The next morning, I woke to the sound of rain tapping softly against the window. I looked over to see Sarah still asleep, her hair spilling across the pillow. In that quiet moment, I realized how much I had come to cherish her presence. I decided to surprise her with breakfast. As I moved around the small kitchen, I reflected on how far I had come. I was no longer the man haunted by betrayal. I was someone ready to embrace new beginnings. After breakfast, we decided to take a walk in the rain, bundled up in our jackets. The fresh scent of earth and pine enveloped us, and I felt a sense of rejuvenation with every step we took. "You know, I've been thinking," I said as we walked, the rain gently falling around us. "About our future." "Oh?" Sarah raised an eyebrow, her interest piqued. "Yeah. I want us to keep building on this connection. I know we're still figuring things out, but I really care about you," I said, my heart racing. Her smile widened, and she took my hand, squeezing it gently. "I care about you too. I want to keep exploring what we have." As we walked through the rain, I felt a surge of optimism. The path ahead was still uncertain, but I was no longer afraid. I knew that with Sarah by my side, I could face whatever challenges came our way. When we returned to the cabin, we spent the rest of the day wrapped up in each other, talking, laughing, and dreaming about the future. We made plans for trips we wanted to take, adventures we wanted to embark on together. That night, as we sat by the fire, I pulled out my guitar. "I want to play something for you," I said, feeling a mix of excitement and nerves. I strummed a few chords and began to sing a new song I had been working on, a song about hope, healing, and love. As I played, I poured my heart into every note, every lyric reflecting my journey and my feelings for her. When I finished, Sarah's eyes were bright with tears. "That was beautiful," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "Thank you. It's my way of sharing what you mean to me," I replied, feeling vulnerable but proud. As we cuddled by the fire, I knew that I was ready to embrace the future. My past had shaped me, but it wouldn't dictate my destiny. Together, we could create a life filled with love, understanding, and new experiences. In that moment, I realized that while the road ahead might have its challenges, I was no longer walking it alone. I had found someone who saw me for who I truly was, and I was ready to embrace whatever came next, one song, one step, one heartbeat at a time.